Welcome to Your Next Chapter. I'm Jeremiah Tittle, CEO of Next Chapter Podcasts and host of this show. We have some exciting updates about the future of Your Next Chapter. To detail what's in store, we have our executive producer, Nick Castner, on today. Nick, welcome to the show.
JT, it is great to be with you today. This is my first time on air for the show, so very, very excited to be here. Thanks for inviting me on. How's it going today?
It's going well. I think you and I are both, in a similar position in that you just came back from Podcast Movement in DC.
Exactly.
When we're recording this, and I was not there, but I was kept up all night by a cat. So these are the type of details that you only get on Your Next Chapter. But how was movement? You had a good time?
I had a really good time. It was probably the best one I've been to. I haven't been I skipped the last one in LA, but was in DC. And my favorite, I saw a friend there who framed it as summer camp. That you see all your podcast friends all in one place. That everyone I could possibly email throughout a year is at the same conference. So it was good. Yes. Yeah, we did miss you there though. So hopefully we will see you at the next one, JT.
You're giving me bad FOMO because not only is it my hometown of DC, but also it is the podcast friends that I most look forward to seeing twice annually. If you're just a movement attendee, but this podcast is pretty inside baseball in terms of the podcast industry. And I know today we wanted to talk about some adjustments, some tweaks to the direction in terms of what we're doing on this show. I've really enjoyed all the guests that you've booked on the show, and we give you a shout out here and there, pretty much every episode, actually.
Which I love.
Yeah, I know. It feeds the ego.
Hey, that's exactly what I was going to say. Yeah.
And we're two brothers in arm candy, which I didn't use until you introduced it to me because our better halves are musicians, and I call myself, stagehand often because I'm often supporting my partner and getting ready for her gigs and whatnot. But we live in the podcast universe, and the industry has really had a wacky year and a half,
to say the least.
There was this very 49er-esque, like panning for gold, and few were very fortunate to do quite well. Company exits and big deals a la Joe Rogan, etc. And then the rest of us, hopefully caught some of that draft. I feel very fortunate to be running Next Chapter Podcasts and to have a healthy business despite the economy doing what it's doing, and a lot of big companies, Spotify, et cetera, laying off folks. So I'm always mindful of that as well. But yeah, there was this rapid growth followed by what we've been calling behind the scenes a market correction. But I feel like it's really poised for a promising future. I feel like this show, Your Next Chapter, it features conversations with top audio creators, that really are shaping the next era of podcasting. And while we're shifting away from what has been a lot more of a nonprofit conversation, because as I've said on the show before, we looked at our business about a year or so ago. We were launching a new website. So we did this whole brand audit, which was super healthy. And I recommend all companies doing it at the right time for them. But we looked at all our clients and we said to ourselves, well, the majority of them are nonprofit. So what is it about nonprofits that attracts them to us and us to them? And I think it's safe to say we really want to be working with folks who are looking to have a positive impact on the world. And you've done a great job of putting people in that hot seat that you're currently sitting in to talk about their businesses and why they're in it, because it's not always for the coin, right? Or it shouldn't be. It should be for, having that positive impact. So the goal now for the show, and I'd love your thoughts, or correct me if I'm saying it, in a way that you could add a little nuance to, but we're continuing to provide value to any organizational leader who's considering launching a podcast. So you don't have to have been running a nonprofit for X number of years or anything to that effect. But if you're just curious about the podcast world, understanding that it is very pervasive, it's a part of the zeitgeist now, podcasting is. And no matter where we are in the growth of the industry, that there's still a lot of people that are considering launching a podcast.
Absolutely, yes. And we there's the topics we cover here thus far. What we're 12 episodes into the show have been fairly wide reaching, but centered around the branding, storytelling space. And now the shift will be specifically what's the next chapter of podcasting and what are storytellers or brands doing within podcasting. So especially the organizations you work with, a lot of times being brands or nonprofits, it'll be more specific to podcasting as opposed to branding and storytelling. So if you've been tuning in for the nonprofit conversations, please keep on subscribed, followed, all of that stuff. But yeah, we are looking forward to the next chapter of the show, so to speak. I would love to hear sort of your gut check, your pulse on podcasting. When you're out there speaking to people about podcasts, what type of questions, like, are there common themes of how the conversation starts and develops from there?
Yeah, I mean, I think the two biggest ones are, how do you make money on podcasts? We can talk about that later, because I think that's like a universal question, and there's so many ways. But I think the other question is, I think around the how. How do we do this? I don't know where to get started. I feel like there's so many variables, and therefore we need someone like you, Jeremiah, like Next Chapter Podcasts. And in your case, Nick, in what you do in freelance and working for Condé Nast and some other entities and individuals in supporting their podcast aspirations, I think it's, how do we remove those variables? How do we solve for, your desire, you or your organization's desire to start a podcast, and also, like, it feels very daunting to a lot of people. And I think one of my go-to phrases is not, a sales pitch as much as it is just the fact of the matter is we build teams around talent. I tell prospective clients, I tell just friends who are curious about it because they want to start a podcast maybe. I was actually here in my co-working space about a week ago talking to someone who is helping people in the alternative health space graduate from being like a coach to being to monetizing and trying to build like a program and be an entrepreneur and kind of build out their team. And he thought, look, I'm having all these great conversations with these really smart people. And I'd like to seriously consider starting a podcast, but I don't know where to start. So that's the main, I think, roadblock or hurdle that we try to give comfort, because we've done this so many times before.
Yeah.
To say, we're not looking to you to do everything. We're here to support you so you can focus on the thing you do well.
Absolutely. And, podcasting is daunting. That's the most, the biggest red flag, if you will, for when I'm talking with newer podcasts is people who think it's going to be easy, and it's not. Podcasting is tons of work. It can be a lot of time, but a huge value add for Next Chapter is, here's a checklist of things we're gonna go through in order to make this podcast the best it can be. And it's similar to the first question you mentioned on how do you make money on that. Depending on who I'm talking to, especially if it is like a business thought leader or smaller organization, nonprofit brand, I always push back on the how do I make money, because a lot of times the underlining thought in that is like, how am I going to have a huge audience that I sell ads against? But a lot of times that's not always that is not always the best way to approach it. And instead, a podcast can support branding and marketing. A podcast can be so many things that it can support social media posts. It can support your blog, your newsletter, and can really be ingrained in your marketing funnel to attract new customers and monetize that way. How do you normally go about answering that question when people ask you how do you make money?
I love everything you just said. And I don't think this is really new, although it's kind of been adapted to. Podcasts is that there's about 10 different channels of revenue that you can create. There's so many. Mm-hmm. And rather than becoming a generalist and going that general route of, I want to appeal to the most amount of people most of the time, sort of radio old school thinking. And I think at TV too. I mean, that's why our news and many shows are just so milquetoast, because there's not that daring, which is available in podcasts, because I think you're really rewarded by cultivating an audience by going niche and even going deeper into that niche, and getting the right audience more than getting the biggest audience. Having a big audience, very valuable, especially in advertising, as you outlined. But I think the more niche you can go into the specific zone of genius, if you spend the Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 hours in a specific field, I don't care if it's real estate or if it's vitamins and alternative health, or yoga, or a recent client of ours, Hatch for Hunger. They're all about ending food insecurity, which I think is a wonderful mission. And so I think that the deeper you go into your specific field of expertise, and knowing that audience, speaking to them and having conversations with other people who also care about your mission, I think that is the best way. This is a long-winded answer that I'm not very directly answering.
No,
but
I love it.
I think that's the best way to cultivate the right audience, is what I want to say. And does that correct audience, the one that will be most fed by and interested in the content you create, pay you for subscribing via Patreon, Supercast, Supporting Cast, any of these platforms that allow you to create a paywall, but also add value to your listeners, whether that's through merch or exclusive content, maybe a long form interview for people who really care, as opposed to just the short 30 minutes that you publish on a weekly or biweekly basis. I think that's where you're building. You're building a movement. You're building an audience that most identifies with the content that you're putting out into the world, these conversations or what have you, and you're asking them for a little coin for all your hard work that you just very accurately laid out. Podcasting is not for the faint of heart, and I think you're better off, I think, seeing it as a daunting thing and then finding us or you or a good producer and production house to support you. You're better off doing that than trying to do every single role that makes a successful podcast.
Yes, yeah. There's so many hats to wear when creating and growing and monetizing a show. Another way, when you work in podcasting, it's so easy to see download numbers in the dashboard and disconnect that from the humans listening. But especially for new people in the space, I'll take your client, for example, that if a leader of a nonprofit organization had a devoted audience of 50 people in a room who show up once a week ready to hear them talk about a niche topic, that leader would go to that room. That would be valuable for them. And podcasting gives you the ability to do that without having all of those 50 people in a room. So even when you go niche, you do sacrifice that to scale, as we said previously, but that can actually be to your benefit.
What is your marketing mix? What's your marketing strategy? I would assume, I hope it's not just one thing like advertising on Meta and Instagram. I hope it's a mix of different things. LinkedIn. That there's a lot of other platforms, whether it's X or what have you, that you could leverage. However, those are short and hopefully sweet, and similar to TV, in that you don't get much real estate, you don't get much time. I was recently recording, earlier today, in fact, interview with someone for another branded content podcast with Amagi, which is in the FAST industry, which is free ad supported television, which is apparently the future.
As
And
I've
we
heard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this company, Amagi, in this conversation was talking about how the guest rather was talking about how, after about a half hour of listening to someone talk, especially a mix of industry conversation or whatever they're there to talk about, in addition to that personal, we get to know people a little bit better. And I think, like as is the case with this podcast, I mean, I put more of myself out there in this podcast than I have in any of my social media posts or anything like that. I try and be real and authentic on social, with a wink and crack some jokes or whatnot. But I feel like there's nothing like listening to someone's voice or watching a video of someone kind of explain what excites them about, in my case, podcasting, in our case, this industry.
Of course.
And I think for any brand, for any, whether it's nonprofit, for profit, advocacy organization, or an individual that wants to host a podcast, people are going to get to know you through this medium. You're going to go deeper onto subjects. You don't get that 2 minute in and out TV appearance where you only had a chance to say a handful of words, really. So I think the depth is what I'm getting at of podcasting, is what's so valuable about it, especially in how inundated we are with stimuli.
Hmm.
Just turn on any news channel. They've all taken the PTI multiple scroll on the bottom, and then you have like the topic lists on the one side. It's just overwhelming for our human brains, and can you even keep track of what the people are saying on TV? So that's why I think the audio medium is here to stay and growing for a reason, because it just like cuts down on all that you're trying to take in. You can actually listen and feel like you're a part of a conversation, maybe a fly on the wall.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I'm coming to you at this very moment from my bedroom, and no one listening will ever be in my bedroom. It's a podcasting is an intimate experience.
Sure.
And you end up spending my favorite podcasters. I spend hours with every single week. That yes, it is a medium that builds connection in a way that we really haven't seen media do since maybe, I mean, long form radio. But yes, yeah. When you're speaking with clients about podcasting, is there anything that you find that particularly resonates with people who don't know much about the industry, but they're curious?
I think the opportunity for magic. I know I toss it around, but um, in the case of our first original podcast, the 500, we just hit a milestone of about 6 years of making this show,
Wow.
and on the 300th episode, we had Bill Burr, who we could kind of say, as one of the biggest comedians in the world today, um, is the godfather of the 500 with Josh Adam Myers. He's the reason. Um, I don't want to give him all the credit, but he's one of the major reasons that this podcast, we got to deal with Spotify, and we were able to, grow the audience early, right after launch, and then continue to have it be a fruitful, successful podcast. And when I say magic, it doesn't have to be some famous person. It has to be someone that the host has a real giddy excitement about speaking to on the air. And maybe it's someone that they already have phone conversations with on a regular basis. Right now for the Hatch for Hunger podcast, we're trying to get the Indiana Pacers head coach, Rick Carlisle on the show, because apparently he and the Pacers are very passionate about food insecurity. So this is going to be a fanboy moment, probably for the host. I hope he doesn't mind me saying that. But it's a for Danny Leckie to be able to talk to Rick Carlisle, even if they've had maybe charity functions together and have had basketball conversations or whatever. I think when you launch a podcast and you have in mind maybe even like crown jewel guests that you're like, I don't know if I can get this person, but give it to our guest booker, Emily Kagan. She's the best. And she will reach out to the most famous of people, even if the expectation is they'll say, no, Oprah, we're waiting. But, the point is that without a podcast, why are you trying to reach out to Oprah or Rick Carlisle or Bill Burr or whomever? I think it's the opportunity that you have to have deep conversations about issues that these people are not necessarily always being asked about, hence the niche. And going deeper into that niche, you find the passion point for these folks. In Bill Burr's case, he is obsessed, loves AC/DC. It's his favorite band, and Highway to Hell was the album that we had coming up on our list 6 years into this podcast. So couldn't have been a better person to talk to about AC/DC, Highway to Hell, some of the controversy around the album. I mean, he was just giddy for more than 2 hours. We talked to Bill Burr, and I don't know when he's given out that type of time to anybody. So magic is what I would say.
Exactly, yeah. And that show in particular, being niche and different, results in a different interview that is like, that pitch looks different than all other media opportunities Bill Burr has available to him. So yes, I mean that's one example of many we just outlined of why going niche in this space, especially for especially for branded podcasts around either small businesses or nonprofits is so valuable. The kind of shifting gears, JT, to the future of podcasting. What makes you optimistic about this industry and podcasting as a medium?
I'm very optimistic because I see the creative content that is being produced. I see it as an opportunity for marginalized voices, for folks, BIPOC creators to make some really compelling content. I see some known entities. We talked about Malcolm Gladwell earlier, but he's creating at Pushkin some phenomenal shows, and I think there's not a lot of room in the mainstream media to do something like this. Whereas in podcasting, it's kind of choose your own adventure, isn't it? You have this opportunity to highlight history that is some are trying to bury. You have the opportunity to get people out of jail, serial proved. You have real time journalistic opportunities. You have some very creative fiction that's being made that ends up perhaps as a streaming series because the concept was so compelling. While those might be few and far between as far as podcasts turning into TV shows, it's something that we aspire to with some of the projects that we've worked on, both fiction and nonfiction. And it's not just about the big story of something getting turned into a movie or something like that, which is exciting. It's more about the fact that you can do anything. Hence why I think some people feel overwhelmed. But I think with our guidance, we can kind of coach people through, hey, you have an idea? Here's let's add our 2 cents to it. Let's add our team to it with experience in making your idea come to life in the audio space. And then where it goes from there, time will tell.
Well, the two data points I always point to that I've heard you reference on the show even is, while there's been tremendous job loss, that I have been impacted by that too over the last 2 years. Yes, definitely feel that there are a lot of people with professional pain in podcasting. At that same time, more listeners keep on tuning into podcasts, and more dollars keep on being spent on podcast advertising. Which, if you were to do a top line just health check of the industry, those would probably be some of your two biggest KPIs.
I think although they're like the OGs of podcasts, there's the true crime junkies, the true crime kind of removing, what is it, the fourth wall or whatever, where you're like, this is some scary stuff, and we have the opportunity to add our personality to it as well. Karen Kilgariff and what it's one of the biggest true crime podcasts in the world. They add comedy to their show that I think is just phenomenal to have your own angle and way to leverage, although they may not describe that this was the original idea, but to leverage like a super strong vertical or genre in true crime, but then to add some lightness to it or to add some personality or humor. I feel like that's where podcasting is so special, because you have the opportunity to do things in a different way. Like people ask me, is there a roadmap? And I do have a slide on one of our decks where there is a roadmap, but every time I pull it up, I'm like, but you could completely flip this and do it almost in the opposite, because it ends with monetization after you've grown an audience. Sometimes, you have funding from the get-go, or you're trying to sell a concept as part of a grant. And in those cases, once you do have the funding, then you can put it to use and to make a great series with it. So, the cash doesn't have to come at the end of the path to podcast success. It could begin your roadmap at the very start.
Yes, and there's plenty of examples where cash doesn't always need to be linked to the show either. Like cash can come through you using the show to generate sales leads or connect with customers, or
absolutely,
what have you. You mentioned My Favorite Murder, a podcast I'm working on that I would love to give a shout out to, is called Slaycation. It's about it's about murders that happen while on vacation. And there's 3 hosts, but the primary one is a female person of color who is a former social worker, and they are able to weave comedy through education around domestic violence. It is another example of a true crime show that feels new and fresh when there's been so many true crime shows produced.
I love that, and I love the fact that Jerry Colbert is behind that, right?
A former guest. Yes, exactly. I think guest number 1, actually. Yeah, when we launched the show, JT was like, "Oh, who could you book?" I was like, "Let me email my friend Jerry."
No, Jerry's awesome, and it feels a little off the map from some of the other stuff that he's done before, but I think that's a good indicator of the creativity and the possibilities of the type of storytelling that you can do in podcasting. That doesn't have to be it doesn't have to represent you as like, it could just be a fun, entertaining project. Like, often when I meet people, they're like, "Oh, what's your podcast?" And I'm like, "Well, I do have Your Next Chapter,
Of course,
but I also co-host and executive produce the 500, and we produce at any given time, 5 to 10 different series. So my podcast is a complicated question. You wouldn't think it would be the case, but we make a lot of different things. And I think variety is the spice of life. I mean, I enjoy, I never wanted to have a desk job or go into an office and kind of do the same repetitive thing every time. So that's one reason I love making podcasts with this company. And I think you have a similar, you're not a one-trick pony, are you?
Yes, definitely. For some context, I'm a freelancer. I work across multiple teams, including Next Chapter, and my work primarily is centered around monetization and marketing of podcasts. But I am, of course, the show's producer. My primary gig is at Condé Nast, the media conglomerate that owns like Vogue, Vanity Fair. Um, but then I do a bunch of work with smaller production teams like Next Chapter, Atomic Entertainment, which is Jerry Colbert's company. So yes, I am wearing multiple hats across multiple teams. So JT, kind of moving on, I guess I'll frame this as like a critique. But is there an area of podcasting that you would like to see improved as we move into this next chapter?
I think transparency, because it does come up so often with clients. I think there's some folks who don't want that to change, but I think that's just a bit of a challenge for folks when they a recent client. We had a call actually last night, and they said, "So how are we doing?" It's like, well, what are your goals? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
because between a million downloads. I mean, and some of the best performing podcasts are just light years away from some of a branded content podcast that we produce, depending on the marketing budget, et cetera. So, I think it's really hard to gauge success. And I think that's why you have to do a lot of work on the front end to determine what your goals are. Is the goal to make a bunch of advertising revenue based on some marketing that we could spend on the front end to kind of grow the audience? Or is your goal to reach the right audience? I think I was talking about that earlier in the show, is that if you're really looking to reach the right audience, the people that are most aligned with what you're seeking to do with the show, your audience, then I feel like you're probably going to be closer to success in that case, rather than taking on Joe Rogan and Oprah, because that's not for everybody's without a giant marketing budget. And even then, it's very difficult. So,
Yeah.
I would say the transparency aspect of the podcast industry really could improve. I know it's going in that direction, but that's something I would say I wish I could make snap my fingers and make every download available tomorrow.
Yes, of course. I would say I have probably a two-part answer here. Number one is when podcasting first started, especially on the creator front, it really lacked diversity. That there's about a season of SNL where it seemed like almost every episode they joked about the white bro podcasters, where that was like primarily the people podcasting were white bros. I do say I would like to acknowledge the touch of irony that we're both white bros podcasting at this very moment. um, but there's been a lot of discussion on improving that and ensuring that it's an industry that welcomes any type of voice. And I hope those conversations continue to progress, and it's not something that we permanently put on the back burner ever. And then secondarily, when it comes to marketing, there's a lot of talk about how to get people already listening to podcasts, listening to your own podcast. And as a marketing strategist in podcasts, I think that generally is a good strategy. But I am interested in how do you get more people listening to podcasts. And I don't even have a clear cut answer, but I would say again, if we're snapping fingers, that is that. Those are my two answers on how do we continue to ensure this industry evolves in a positive direction.
Even if we are two white bros talking podcasts, I mean, I think more diversity in this space is absolutely paramount. And another guest that you booked, Chris Colbert, he was fantastic, and in just talking about what changed from 2020 and some of the funds that were promised versus what was the actual support for marginalized communities to have their voices heard. So it's been really important for us at Next Chapter to have balance there, to seek out talent both in front and behind the microphone, behind the camera, and in front of the camera as well, to be really, just thoughtful about the people that we hire and the people who we're supporting in terms of their voices and getting them out there. I was going to ask you, because we ask every guest this question.
Thank you.
What's your next chapter,
JT.
Nick Castner? What's next for your career? I'd love to know.
I've had a fair amount of, I would say, career instability over the last 12 months. And I am now, I've just plugged in, especially over the last couple of months, plugged into teams that I really like working on, like contributing. My next chapter is just keeping the status quo. I just like the teams I'm working on. I went to Podcast Movement, met with some potential clients, which I'm excited about, and hope to join, or take on some short-term marketing work here and there. But in general, I would like some stability is my next chapter. JT, I know you ask almost every guest this. What's your next chapter?
Look at you with your table turning tactics. That is very rude, and I'm happy to answer because I have moved to Spain. It's a decision that had been kind of in the ether in my home and my family for the last since April. Felt like this was the right move. I've always wanted to live abroad in a different country, so it's actually very special for me. Hasn't been easy in the first month, but I'll say that I'm very excited to hopefully get my digital nomad visa approved and be able to stay here for a longer period of time. And then the biggest challenge I have to deal with after that is, or already have been dealing with, is time zones.
Oh my gosh.
Thank goodness you're in New York, because I used to keep my brain in LA or on the Pacific time zone. And that was a lot easier for me when I was in Hawaii. But now I'm up early for anyone in mainland USA. And so it's been quite a challenge, but I'm not here to complain about it because I've eaten the most delicious foods thus far. And there's a lot of positives to say about this culture that really is passionate about and loves life and knows how to live. And I'm here for it. So that's the most recent development in my personal life. And I have no aspirations to create some Spanish spin-off of Next Chapter. I'm open to, translations and expanding, the audiences for some of our shows for sure. But my goal is to just kind of in your status quo answer, like do the same. Like, how do I keep operating from this whole other part of the world? That's what I'm trying to answer that question.
Yeah, and I'm sure I work with teams all over the place, and the time zone change. I'm constantly Googling, like, what time is it in XYZ, just as a double check to my math. But being other places, I like being halfway around in the world from the majority of people you work with. I'm sure is a headache. How is your Spanish? Do you speak Spanish?
Yeah, I started taking Spanish classes in 4th grade, and I didn't take any in college. I wish I had, but I took AP Spanish in high school, and I lived in Miami for 2 years, where Spanish is the first language. No matter what anybody tells you, it's not really in the United States. It is the capital of Latin America, and for those 2 years, it took me like 6 months to start to feel comfortable talking, like you can understand and hear. But talking and that comfort level, as I'm hoping it comes back quickly here while being here. But yeah, the time zones being what they are, that Bill Burr conversation I was telling you about, we wrapped up around 2 a.m. I think my time. Wow. So, but for Bill Burr, I'll do that. For Nick Castner, I'll at least stay up till 8 p.m.
Thank God, JT.
At least.
Yeah, at least, at minimum. I'm currently taking Spanish lessons. I'm just hoping cool. that, improve on that. I'm in the, can kind of read, can kind of write, but am growing my confidence on speaking. So hopefully one day we can have Your Next Chapter in Espanol.
En Espanol, we're going to do this. Okay, you said it out loud. The gods are listening. It's going to happen. I'm excited for that.
Yeah.
Nick, this has been really fun. Thank you so much for joining me on a show that you executive produce.
Yes, of course, JT. Would you mind reading us out?
I'd be happy to. Thank you for listening to this episode of Your Next Chapter. I'm your host, JT. Our executive producer, who you just met and now know a lot more about, is Nick Castner, and the episodes are edited by Justin Cortese. We drop episodes bi-weekly. Please follow the show, and thanks for listening.